if you said this darn weather, but you said another word instead, or you just said this weather is terrible, which one sounds worse? It's normally the one if you use the profanity, it carries a heavier weight, and so I think we use them a lot of times to describe stronger feelings or events in a way that other words can't. Something that carries a lot of weight behind it.
That's for some people, but then like with some of the boys I work with, they come from some of them are from like Columbus and some areas like that, and for them, they're just normal language to them. I mean, that's what they hear. So
I've never understood. See, I don't know. Maybe it's because we grew up in we grew up in a church culture that like where it was not, we don't use them, and so now as an adult, like every time if I do, I'm like I feel that kind of like, oh, I shouldn't have said that, but yeah, I've had conversations, and then like at the terminal, there's guys. There's one guy in particular that it's just like the F-bomb, just one after the next, like throughout his sentences. I'm like, dude, you could have said what you were saying in like 10 seconds instead of a minute and a half. He dropped half of those. Like, I mean, and then I think they lose their weight when they just become.
Yeah, it just becomes like, oh, okay. It depends on your situation. Like you get desensitized. Mm-hmm. I know. And I think for me, in my life, I've gone through periods where they've desensitized to me to where it's not a big deal. But here recently when I put in a lot more, when I'm being able to refine my faith and start growing again, I think they've changed how I look, but it's also the people I'm around and I guess it goes back to what you're saying, what you put in, and everything. Like what I'm around is like helping me. It changes what I put out. So
but you get a better intake when you change the people that you're around. So we'll move on to. What is the definition, I guess, of profanity? Like, profanity means swear words. Profanity can also be called curse words or cuss words, dirty words, bad words, foul language, obscenity. I've heard people say toilet talk or expletives. It's also referred to as swearing, which ironically is irrelevant because swearing means taking a solemn promise. A profanity usually refers to something within religion, sex, or bodily functions. These are things that people feel very strongly about, which is why a lot of these words carry weight. In some languages, such as French, there is more profanity about religion than most other topics. And this is the original meaning from the Latin word meaning before the temple. Religious profanity is also called blasphemy. The verb is to blaspheme, and the adjective is blasphemous. Saying God or Jesus Christ as an expression or surprise or annoyance is considered by many to be blasphemy. And that was kind of how I was raised as well. And as I've grown, like we've all heard, do not take the Lord's name in vain. And as I've grown, that was when we grew up. That's what they always told us. That they always said the first commandment meant don't say oh my God, or don't take don't use that God's name in that way. And this is where it started, was back in this French culture, where they saw it as blasphemy. But that commandment, I mean, yes, that would be, if you're using it in a negative connotation, would be kind of blasphemy, but that's not really where that commandment was actually going. But anyway, and then as this is mostly because one of the 10 commandments says not to use the God's name in vain, meaning without substance or relevance. A profanity can be a word, or as we all know, a gesture, or some other form of behavior. Which I don't know if you've ever thought about that. Have you ever thought about how did like some of the hand gestures that we consider offensive or profanity, like how did that come to be? Like, who was the first person to throw one finger up, and then someone was like, "Oh my!" Like,
well, Shakespeare. If you read Romeo and Juliet, they sit there and they talk, "I'll bite my thumb at you," and that was an insult to them apparently. So you bite your thumb at somebody. So the middle finger, today we have so many different gestures that mean so many different things. But yeah, the middle finger, I'd like to know where that came from.
I googled where did the middle finger originate, and it says I'm just reading this from Google. It says, as a gesture, the exact origins of the middle finger are obscure, though there's some stories, and one story traces back to the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, and as the story goes, French soldiers would cut off the index and middle fingers of the British archers who were shooting their arrows so that they couldn't shoot them. So I guess it was I
still have my finger kind of thing, like
yeah. It was a so that when you would I could see where they would be like, I still have my fingers, and that's kind of a funny origination. I guess that is kind of fitting for how we use that term.
And here's another thing. Since we were talking about the French earlier, wouldn't it be known that one of the most explicit hand gestures that we use is also from the French? Boy, those French people are awesome.
Didn't someone used to say, watch your French? Like, that was another way of saying, like, watch your language?
Pardon my French.
Oh, pardon my French. Yeah, that's what it was, yeah.
Pardon me, do you have any Grey Poupon? And if anybody out there doesn't know what that is, I'm sorry. I'm old, and that just tells how old I am. Whether a word is profanity will always depend on what people think. I mean, that's kind of the thing we've been saying off and on the whole way through here, is it's really cultural references, society's views. I mean, that's how it works. And this is an important thing to note. Whether a word is a profanity will always depend on the way people think. Because if we go to just different places around the state of Ohio, or even here in Cambridge, or where we're close to, a town we're close to, if you go there, depending on the people you talk to, if I come in and I drop the F-bomb, some people will be like, oh my goodness, and other people will be like, hey man, what's up? I mean, it's not a big deal. There's people with nicknames that are that. So, and I think that's the biggest thing, is it really just depends on what people think. And the culture and the people and our thinking are always changing. And I believe in most cases, it's more about the intent or use of the word, which I've said probably 4 or 5 times now already, rather than the word itself. Some people will be offended by something, while others will not be. In this day and age, honestly, there's not much that doesn't offend people. I know by doing this podcast, we are offending people, and I'm not even going to get on that soapbox. I'm sure
there could be someone in the very religious side of things that's like cringing at our conversation.
Yeah, because we're just more not so bad. We're not so heavy.
Yeah, and Wikipedia defines profanity as socially offensive language, and it says that it started back in the medieval eras, actually in plays, as a way to show a lot of emotion and deep exclamation with words. So I guess it's always kind of had that that background. So I did do some research. I was curious if there were any places that had laws about profanity. And in Middleborough, Massachusetts, whose town meeting, they resulted in, they imposed a $20 fine for swearing in public. which I found very interesting.
Well, I'm gonna stay out of that place.
I don't think I've ever been to Massachusetts, but be aware of Middleborough, Massachusetts, if you have a hard time controlling your tongue. Another one is Virginia law, which I'm not surprised by this one, because if anybody knows, Virginia's like very strict. Like, I think it was, what is it, initial speeding ticket down there? I think it's like $500 for the first time. And
it's a beautiful country, state. I've been there. My brother-in-law lives down there. We've been down there a couple of times. I did not know that this law until I read this, or until we started working on this. So I'm not telling my brother-in-law that, hey, we gotta watch our language. $250 down there on vacation is not gonna be nice.
I said it's one of my, when we have friends that live in Florida, and whenever we've driven down there, that's one of my favorite states that we get to drive through is Virginia. It's a beautiful drive, but so now I've learned though that Virginia law. So I guess we must stay in the car if we're going to use any words that we don't want fined for. Virginia law has banned any uttering of any of your favorite 4-letter words, and it says if you're caught, you could be charged with a Class 4 misdemeanor and fined $250.
Nah, that's crazy. And then we looked up some arrest stories for profanity, which I've got a story with my cousin. We didn't get arrested, but we did get pulled over. We were cruising around Cambridge back in the day, before cell phones and all this. What we'd do is drive the strip, and we'd go up and turn around. Everybody did it on Friday and Saturday nights is what everybody did. And we were turning around in this one parking lot, and he remembered that he had Saturday school the next day. So it's summer, the windows are down. He yells, "Beep!" very loud. Cop was close by and heard it. Swung in, pulled us over. I mean, we were 16 or 17-year-old kids in the car. I mean, we got the right act. It was horrible.
Oh my gosh.
Oh man, it was like.
This is like a city cop?
Yeah, it was a city cop. It was. I mean, they were giving us all this because we were.
Was cussing. They'll pick anything to pull somebody over for. They're always. Oh my gosh, that'd be boring to be a city cop, but.
He had a cop on his side. I had the cop on the other side. They wanted to see my ID and everything like that. We had to get out of the car. I mean, all because he forgot he had Saturday school.
There was once that I'd let one slip in front of a cop, and I was real nervous because one time I had a Chevy Blazer one time when we had to go to AutoZone to get parts for it. We're on our way back from Zanesville, and do you remember when they had like one lane closed on 70? This was, I don't know, probably 5 years ago. For the longest time between Zanesville and Cambridge, and Justin's driving, my brother-in-law, and I said, "It's a 55 through here," and he was going 60, and then a Stady came up behind us, like going through, and it's the construction zone is even worse, and I said, "Justin, you need to slow down. There's a Stady behind you." He's like, "Oh, it's okay," and then I'm like, "He's gonna pull you over," and he's like, "No, he won't," and then he flips his lights on. I'm like, "Oh." So we get through the construction zone, and then we pull over. And then Justin starts he's like panicking because he's never been pulled over. And he clams up and just like doesn't say a word. So this cop comes over to the window, and he's like asking Justin questions. And like then the guy gets all suspicious because Justin's just like clamming up, not saying anything. And I'm like, I let a word slip. I'm like, "Come on, Justin." I was like, "Talk before we get dang arrested just because you're being quiet." And he was getting all suspicious because we were all being weird, and there was he said he was confused on why there was I don't remember, there was a couple 100 pounds of deer corn in the back, so he didn't know what we were doing with that. So I don't know, he must not have been a hunter, but
which I'll interject real quick for our listeners. We're from Ohio, where we have 2 seasons. We have winter and we have construction. Yeah. So when we're talking about construction, like literally, like you can tell time frames of our lives by major construction projects.
Yep.
Because it's horrible. And let's not even talk about potholes because it's even worse.
So what'd you find arrest story wise?
Arrest stories in West Monroe, Louisiana. An 18-year-old man was reportedly arrested for cursing near a 75-year-old woman in Louisiana. Which I can just imagine this. Jared Dylan Smith was booked into jail on a disturbing the peace through language and disorderly conduct charge on April 8th, 2017, which surprisingly